In the next 900 seconds, Bobby and I will break down for you the biggest game on Saturday. Then we'll transition to the market moves you should know about before heading into the weekend. And before we get you out of here, 3 best bets. So, Bobby, we're on the clock. We will jump into one of our favorite games of the week, Old Dominion and James Madison. This game is going to help determine the the Sun Belt East winner. Old Dominion currently catching 1.5 with a total of 48. Old Dominion obviously no showed against Marshall last week. James Madison kind of just walked the Louisiana game. Bobby, what do you think about this game here?
Yeah, JMU obviously settled recently on Alonzo Barnett at quarterback after splitting reps with Holy Cross and UNLV transfer Matthew Sluka earlier in the year. And quite frankly, like earlier in the year, they were like basically doing a run pass tell with how they were running that offense. And while that offense hasn't fully been jump started, now they've stopped doing that. Couple ho-hum recent performances and some play as large favorites, fueled by just general inefficiency. However, like JMU, despite being one of the more talented teams in the Sun Belt, they really kind of aren't built based on play style to win by margin here. Right. They do have an elite pass rush, though, and it showed in that Louisville game. They actually like won that game in the trenches, and they'll have the advantage here as well. Like they could have easily beaten Louisville on that. I think it was a Friday night when they played in week 2. ODU's Colton Joseph, he leads the team, obviously leading passer, but also leading rusher. Been explosive on the ground and through the air. Had a couple of explosives, so they got their touchdowns in week 1 against Indiana. However, ODU has a ton of turnover issues. Kind of showed in that Marshall game where they had 5, but they averaged almost 3 a game. They're 130th in red zone scoring percentage, just under 70%. Despite that, they have been blowing out some of the lower competition here in the Sun Belt with that dynamic offense, and they did obviously beat the kind of dead version of Virginia Tech earlier in the year, and I do think that kind of fluffed their rating a little bit. Both teams obviously prefer to run here. ODU's rush defense, though, is outside the top 100 in defensive success rate, and I think here that's going to help the Bulldogs here in controlling the pace. I actually like James. I think they're the better. James Madison's the better team in this game, quite frankly. So I would lay the 1.5 with JMU, and I also additionally like the under, as unders in JMU games have been something I've kind of liked to play a little bit. Additionally, to help that the total at least, both teams do actually struggle in the kicking game as well.
Week 8 is full of games with big playoff implications, and this is another one. Southern Cal traveling to Notre Dame. The Trojans catching 9.5 with a total of 62. This essentially is going to make or break Notre Dame's season, and the defense has made significant improvement. Now they'll be tested again by this Southern Cal quarterback, Maaba, which comes in this game a little bit down with the 2 running backs out. So what we're going to find out here is this defensive improvement for real with their improvements against Arkansas, Boise, last week against NC State. So, Bobby, how do you see this playing out? Can this defense hold up against the Trojan offense?
Yeah, we're top 2 offenses in college football based on some efficiency metrics playing. You still have a total in the low 60s there, a little bit lower than some of the other totals this week out there, but that's actually because there is potential weather here in South Bend. Just right now, currently, like heavy storms possibly in the forecast in the beginning part of the game. So that's just something you have to keep in mind as you're going through the week and monitoring kind of the forecast. You mentioned USC having 2 running backs banged up. Obviously, if this game is in weather and requires more of a running attack, that certainly favors Notre Dame with Love and Price. We bet against USC last week. They with Michigan. Wrong side. The Trojans really impressed in the trenches last week, but still want to see them improve it and stopping a more dynamic rushing attack here with Notre Dame. They're still outside the top 100 in rushing success rate. Defense and middle of the pack in terms of EP kind of come back in those situations where it doesn't apply to the Irish here. You mentioned it. We've mentioned it a couple times. Notre Dame defense continued improvement, really. 9 turnovers, 11 sacks in their last 3 games, along with only allowing 27 points to pretty good offenses in Arkansas, Boise, and NC State. It's still going to be quite the task to stop Maaba, Malachi Lemon, Jacoby Lane in this passing attack. But I do expect stud corner Leonard Moore and the young secondary to kind of hopefully like slow down Lemon a little bit. And that's absolutely a star matchup on the outside there. What's interesting here is I actually think the market. Circa has been holding a 10 on USC for like the last like 24 hours. 10K limits for anyone who wants to bet it. And there hasn't been a buy. It's just been sitting there. And they've been sitting market high, and that's obviously a leading indicator book. We've kind of said market Notre Dame's a top 5 power rated team. The market's agreeing here. My number is close to 10 on this one, so it totally makes sense to me. Total wise, I think you have to wait on the weather, playing over or under. And quite frankly, like if the weather is crap, USC has had for the past couple of years since joining the Big Ten horrible home road splits. We'll see if I have the stones to actually click it, but the weather's bad. USC team total under, which kind of projects maybe to be in the high 20s. That might be a look for me come Saturday.
Another game that has big implications for a conference championship. This should fast track one of these teams to be playing potentially Alabama in Atlanta. Ole Miss catching 7.5 as they travel between the hedges to Georgia. The total is currently sitting at 54. This, in our opinion, definitely Ole Miss' first real road game. They played a road game way back in week 2, if you remember back even that far. And there's going to be a change of quarterback from that game. Trinidad Chambliss is now the starting quarterback for Ole Miss, traveling to Georgia. I'm sure you've seen by now all of the Georgia lowlights or highlights from that Auburn game. Georgia definitely been volatile, inconsistent at times this season. Very uncharacteristic from the Georgia team that we have known and loved the last few seasons. Bobby, 7.5 seems a little bit high. 7 seems more of a right number. What do you make Ole Miss in Georgia?
Yeah, overall, not a fan of the Ole Miss defense. I think they've played, just generally speaking, outside of Arkansas, where they allowed 35 points, lackluster offenses for the most part. And despite all that, they are still basically in the bottom 4th of the country in defensive line yards, havoc, rush explosiveness. We saw Georgia be able to take advantage of Alabama's rush explosiveness defense in that game a few weeks back. And Ole Miss's relative defensive strength has been slowing down the pass, and especially the explosive pass. But that's not really Georgia's game. Gunner, 7.23 yards per dropback, and a real nice completion percentage as well. As far as the defense goes, Georgia's pass rush has been outright awful this season, but they have been able to contain the run, top 40 in EPA and success rate metrics. That's going to make it difficult for Ole Miss running back Kwan Lacey on the ground. Now, like we saw in the Tennessee and Alabama games, Georgia can be had through the air, as we mentioned in that pass rush, and I do expect Trinidad Chambliss to be able to take advantage of some of those Georgia DBs making plays on the ball. You mentioned the side a bit. This is one similar to the A&M Mississippi State game from a few weeks back, where my number, I've kind of been higher on Georgia than the market. But tentative just because they don't have it looked the part, despite what my numbers, with some preseason priors have said. It's the first time where I'm not showing value betting Georgia. I do think 7 is the perfect number. We saw some openers below 7 on Sunday, in that 6.5 range, and obviously we've blown through it here. I do think that this is probably a right spot to sell Ole Miss. I definitely couldn't do it at 7.5. I just think 7 is like a perfect number here in terms of the side. However, with the rushing explosiveness advantage on the Georgia side, the ability to maybe make some plays in the passing game, and both defenses have been allowing some manageable third down distance so far this season. I actually lean over in this one at 54. I know there's some 53.5 in the market. It's not something I've bet to this point, but I might get to the window on at some point later this week.
Our final breakdown, the People's Choice Game of the Week. This was voted on by you on our Twitter poll. The Holy War, the first ranked matchup of the Holy War since 2009. Winner of this game is in position to qualify for the Big 12 Championship to face Texas Tech. I have no play in this game, and if you follow us on Twitter, last week you might have got a plus 475 ticket in your pocket for Utah to make the Big 12 title, as we correctly identified that game was mispriced before they played Arizona State. This one kind of comes down to Bear Bachmeier. Utah will load the box, force Bachmeier to beat them. And then Utah, if they do find themselves in a hole, BYU's lack of a pass rush should allow Utah to get back in the game. Bobby, how do you see this game breaking down?
All right, so we're going to get this out of the way. Just like I said, Illinois was a fake top 10 team. BYU is a fake top 15 team. Power ratings wise, I have them 36th right now in my power ratings. So nowhere near sniffing that. I do have Illinois ahead of them, by the way. And going through the schedule, they've played no one. It's a 23 or 27-3 ho-hum win over Stanford, maybe when they were at the bottom of the market. A nice win at ECU, where ECU couldn't get out of their own way, and definitely should have competed more in that game than the scoreline. 2 should have been losses at Colorado and Arizona, and they allowed 24 points on a Friday night to West Virginia's basically wildcat offense post all the injuries. Now, I will say something nice as well. I do like BYU's defensive coordinator, Jay Hill. He knows how to scheme up a defense, and I do think that he should eventually get looks to be a head coach back. He was a former head coach at Weber State, I believe, in the FCS level before becoming the DC at BYU. So for the game, Utah has an elite offensive line. The BYU defense against that weak schedule is 85th in sack percentage. So that should allow Devin Dampier time in the pocket. Now he is going to have to make good decisions, something that he doesn't always do, quite frankly, in the passing game. And going to have to, kind of take what the defense gives to him scheme-wise. Defensively, Utah has struggled allowing explosiveness, but BYU with Bear Bachmeier, that's not their game. They want to be more methodical and drive down the field. Utah's defensive line should also have an edge here, as BYU's offensive line done a good job protecting Bachmeier, but not as good generating holes. Poor metrics in offensive line yards. Running back LJ Martin has just been phenomenal on his own, 639 yards, 4 touchdowns on the ground so far this season. And Bachmeier's been good in the ground game as well. Market-wise, the totals ticked up a bit. Not sure I agree with it, but we're going to chill on Utah totals for a bit here on the show. And not surprising here based on my kind of rant here at the top. I like Utah to win this game. I haven't laid the 3.5 yet. I still might before Saturday. I kind of want to see where the market goes. My number here is in the 4.5, 5 range. What's interesting here is just raw number, that's using a raw number where BYU has a strong home field advantage. And this actually applies when these two teams play each other. And then as well, obviously Colorado as well, that their home field has a natural, in my numbers, I give them a boost for altitude. Well, in this case, it affects Utah or Colorado, a lot less in that. Right. Now, obviously this is underratedly one of the best rivalries in college football. It's a night game. It's going to be a raucous home crowd. So, okay, deduction for the altitude plus for the, bigger atmosphere. That's probably a net neutral. I'll let you decide kind of if you want to take off a quarter point or a half point based on kind of that thought process. But with some of these altitude teams, when they play each other, that little bump in home field that you get might not be as much. And that's, like I said, I'm in that 4.5, 5 range in terms of a number. I do like Utah in the game to hopefully win comfortably against BYU.
Move on to the market. Bobby, what are the notable line movements since we last talked on Sunday, or the current market odds on any noteworthy games?
Yeah, so we are going to start with a general market conversation that we need to have. We mentioned it a couple weeks ago talking about a Wyoming game. We are now in mid-October. You now need to check wind and weather every week, especially in the Midwest, the central part of the United States, but that needs to be a part of your routine in handicapping, especially when thinking about betting totals, specifically overs as well. So just kind of wanted to get that out of the way as a general market note for everyone, and a little reminder of what time of year it is. We'll start with a game we mentioned on Sunday, 353, 354, Texas State Marshall. 5.5 on the opener Sunday, 3.5 when we were live Sunday night. And then Monday it got bet through the 3 to the 2.5. Obviously, now a flip to selling of Texas State in the market. And then Joey Tunes released Texas State earlier this afternoon to kind of bring back the 3s. So just kind of a note there. We've seen some early buys in 2A on that game after, like I said, Texas State was bought in the market the last 2 weeks. 365, 366, LSU Vandy. Still curious on the total here. Sunday opener saw early market movement under, then Circa opened up a higher number and it got bet up from there. I like the under here based on LSU offense scuffling, and I think this LSU defense is really good. I do think we eventually see under money. I'll be betting the under at some point this week. I'll admit I'm a little perplexed by this one. 373, 374, Maryland, UCLA, another game we mentioned Sunday. We're seeing the hooks now on the Terps. Gotta wonder where that true buy point is. If this is the market high, remarket high on this new version of UCLA. I know it's a tough travel with the cross country with Maryland, but I definitely lean that way with the Terps right now. 389, 390, Army Tulane. Early week, this game was Army took money taking this below 10, as well with under money. I agree with one of those moves. Tulane's head coach John Summerall has defended the option both at Troy and Tulane really well. I actually think that's a look on Army team total under when that becomes more widely available later in the week. 399, 400, Ohio State, Wisconsin. Early Wisconsin money here. That got as high as 28, I saw. And we're kind of seeing that trending a little tick back. There was some 24.5 available when I wrote these notes earlier this afternoon. But I kind of was wondering if there would be an Ohio State buy if it got to 24. And then you do have to wonder if OSU wants to bury their former alum, Luke Fickell, in a tough spot in Madison.
Is that a game that you'd
right
look
now
to play first half, just knowing Wisconsin's clearly lack of any offense, and as you mentioned, not wanting to just totally humiliate?
If I liked Ohio State,
yeah.
If I was going to play Ohio State, that's how I'd play it. And then last one, the big market move, 407, 408. Another one we mentioned Sunday night. Texas Tech, Arizona State. Sam Leavitt's practicing, down from a market high of 11.5 at one point Monday. If he's in, I still think this goes down a bit more. Probably either touches 7 or through it. Maybe not. Hard to tell because you have to assume maybe he's not 100%
right
with that injury, but definitely could not be on the other side of 10. And of course, if he is announced out again, it's going to go right back to where it was. So you definitely want to be paying attention to the news on Sam Leavitt in that one.
Guys, before we move into best bets, please click that like and subscribe button. And if you don't mind, drop us a comment as well. The comment can even say, hi, hello, how you doing? Doesn't really matter. It helps the algorithm know that this is quality betting content, and it's going to serve this show to all the other bettors out there that are looking for more signal and less noise, candidly. So if you're on Spotify, leave us a 5-star review and check us out on all the other platforms, especially our Twitter. So Bobby and I are definitely trying to be more active on Twitter and giving out more thoughts and opinions that we can't quite get to on the show just due to changes in price before the show even goes on. So, Bobby, best bets. We gave out a best bet Sunday night. We like the under 44.5 Missouri-Auburn. We've seen some market agreement on that total, as well as the Missouri side takes some money. New best bet for tonight, Minnesota catching the 8.5 against Nebraska, that's right. How could I forget? I had the Purdue game still stuck in my mind. So Minnesota catching the 8.5 at home on the short road week for Nebraska, coming off the back-to-backs. Bobby, why do we like Nebraska? Or excuse me, why are we fading Nebraska? Why do we like Minnesota getting the 8.5 here?
Yeah, I know that some of the box scores haven't been great with Minnesota recently, but I just can't get here in terms of the number. I know there was a service release on the Huskers earlier this week. And I just can't get there with this one. I know Minnesota hasn't been able to run the ball, but Nebraska has really bad rushing defense, and I think that maybe we can get some success there on the ground. So yeah, I like the 8.5 with the Gophers.
We also like Florida Atlantic catching 21.5 at the South Florida Bulls. Florida Atlantic has a high-paced offense, and South Florida kind of maybe looking ahead here to Memphis in a big game that's going to determine the American Conference Championship.
Yep, you mentioned the look-ahead spot, a little sandwich spot, I should say, with South Florida here in this one. So when considering a playing a spot like this. My raw number, which ignores spot, ignores kind of any other factors in that one, makes it 20.5. So then you go, okay, does that number account for that? Account for all the other factors? It doesn't here, kind of going through the 21. So we like the Owls here in this one. Think they have the amount of offense enough to score a little bit with South Florida. Probably not a threat to win the game, but enough to keep it within 3 touchdowns.
Final best bet for Week 8, the Duke Blue Devils laying the 1.5 against the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. Bobby, why are we laying the points here instead of taking them?
Yeah, so this is a very tiny number edge here in this one, but more of a matchup play in my mind. Quite frankly, I think the Duke defensive line is a little bit underrated, and I think they'll be able to contain the Georgia Tech ground attack quite a bit here. And then on the other side of the ball, I think Duke can take advantage of Georgia Tech's defense through the air. So playing a little bit to the matchup here rather than the number. Like I said, it's a very tiny edge. It's not like I make the game 3.5 or anything like that. I do not in this one. So playing matchup based, but we like the Blue Devils to get the win against Georgia Tech. I almost said upset, but it's not.
You can follow Bobby at BobbyDigital2 on Twitter. You can follow the show at CFB900. I will be back here with the Water Boy Friday morning, giving you guys a lot of prop bets as we head into Saturday. And then Bobby and I will be back here Sunday night, looking ahead to Week 9, but also breaking down everything that happened in Week 8. So join us back here Sunday night, 7 o'clock at our usual time. Until then, wishing guys the absolute best of luck. Adios.